morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm Sarah Khan. I'm an assistant professor of political science at the American University School of International Service. I'll be moderating our panel for today on land rights. Before I introduce our panelists, let me just give a brief overview of the topic under discussion and the goals of today's panel. So our panel will explore the challenges and opportunities of securing individual land rights, particularly over agricultural land in Punjab. It'll be focused on the Punjab Urban Land Systems Enhancement, the PULSE program, formally launched in 2022, which builds on previous reform efforts, in particular the establishment of a centralized land record management information system in the province, digitization of land records, and establishment of service centers to host, maintain, and update these records. I also want to flag that in past iterations of the Pathways Conference, we have featured research presentations of work that rigorously explore the impacts of this digitization on agricultural productivity, land market outcomes, and tax collection. And we hope to continue that kind of research on the impacts of the most recent reform. We're hoping that the discussion today will contribute to the broader discourse on governance and inclusion by highlighting the intersection of land rights, gender equity, and economic empowerment. We have four panelists, each of whom bring a distinct perspective to these issues. I'll introduce them very briefly. To my left is Mr. Ikram ul-Haq. He is an officer of the Pakistan Administrative Service with over 15 years of experience. Over the past few years, he's played a central role in PULSE, and now he is the Director General of the Punjab Land Records Authority. Then we have Dr. Ali Cheema, who is Vice Chancellor and Associate Professor of Economics at LUMS. His areas of research include economic development with a focus on human capital, inclusion and economic mobility, gender, public economics, governance, and political economy. We have Ms. Fauzia Viqar, who is an expert on women's rights and empowerment. She was the founding chairperson of the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women, and is currently serving as the federal Ombudsperson for protection against harassment of women in the workplace. We then have Advocate General Punjab, Mr. Khalid, who is a seasoned Supreme Court lawyer with extensive experience in legal practice. He assumed this role in 2023 and oversees the legal affairs of the Punjab government. So we're going to start with some directed questions from myself to kick us off, and then we will open it up and hopefully use actually a lot of the time for audience Q&A and an open conversation. So I want to start by drawing on each of the panelists' expertise to think about the role of context in which efforts at agricultural land governance reforms have been introduced and implemented in Punjab, and how different contextual factors shape the implementation and outcomes from the reform. So to just expand on what I mean, the reform of agricultural land governance and administration systems finds its impetus in an economic logic of efficiency gains, greater productivity that is seen to flow from securing property rights. However, in Pakistan and elsewhere that these reforms have been introduced, they're always happening in a historical, political, and social context, and they're interacting with existing institutions, both formal and informal. One critique of policy design is that it focuses heavily on technical aspects of design without an appreciation of the interaction with these various aspects of context. So I'm going to ask our panelists who have expertise in the functioning of the bureaucracy, in social vulnerabilities along gender and other lines, on political economy and the legal world, to speak a little bit about how these features of context interact with this land reform in particular. So I'll start with Mr. Ikram ul-Haq, and I'll ask you to talk about sort of the bureaucratic will and capacity and the challenges and frictions faced in implementation.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So, like in Pakistan, when we talk about land records and the protection of ownership rights, our land records historically are like more than 150 years old. When you talk about the records, however, the record were initially prepared not as a means of protecting the ownership rights; they were rather a means of securing the land revenue. So, when the British started off with land records, in fact, the modern day land record system and subcontinent started off from Bengal, and the prime purpose was uh, securing of land revenue for the Raj. And it was later on, like the same records were gradually converted into a kind of an indication of ownership rights. Indication, that's not a conclusive right, ownership right. So it's this reason that you see those of you who are familiar with the land records, the way they are maintained in Punjab and of course in rest of Pakistan and India as well. So you see um the rural towns, the population centers are not given any land record numbers. There's no record of the dwellings over there because the British was not interested in ownership rights. They were interested in the agricultural lands from where they could get the land revenue. So that's how the land record started. And then fast forward to 1947 and there onwards. In 1959, we had our first land reforms in Pakistan, where the government of that time actually wanted to have some kind of equitable distribution of lands within um, the masses. So it was decided we need to have some kind of land reforms. But then again, this was poorly conceived, and the litigation arising from those land reforms still continues to date. Then we had another land reforms in 1972. Again, I would think it was not very well conceived or even implemented. And then subsequently, we had in 1977. So, all the land reforms in terms of ownership rights and sizes and everything was not very well conceived and basically took ahead the issues or mistakes that the British made initially. And till to date, we are having the same issues. Although we started resolving some of them with digitization. So when IT infrastructure came into this land records things, the government ultimately realized we cannot have any economic activity based upon the lands unless we secure the rights of the people. This is where the concept of digitized land records, the ownership rights, and all those things started arising up. And today we are standing at a point where we have 93% of land records digitized. However, still the land rights today are indicative rights, not conclusive rights. So we do not have titling in Pakistan as of now. But we are planning to move towards that within the next 2 to 3 years. This is not going to be very easy. However, at least it's going to be a big jump forward. That's I think I can like briefly explain the context of land records and land rights in Pakistan so far.
I'll just ask now Dr. Ali Cheema to say a little bit about the political economy context of land rights and how they interact with formal and informal institutions.
So I think more than political economy, I think what would be more conducive for this discussion is to go back into the history of these settlements. The traditional story that is told about our part of the Punjab, which is Western Punjab, is that it was agriculturalist, but it was actually largely pastoralist. Because till the British actually came in over here, the interfluves of the Doabs, jo Rakh thi in the middle of the Doabs, that was unsettled, and people would actually just graze cattle and other things on it. So a very big, extensive activity was set up to really build a rural society afresh. And that development of settling a rural society actually built on past colonial experiments that had happened in East India and Southern India, where the British had tried two very different land tenure systems. So in the East India, it was the zamindari system, and in South India, it was the peasant based or cultivator based Rayatwari system. where individual cultivators were assigned these indicative rights. But when they came to Punjab, the British had a more tribal vision of how to settle rights. And it was basically an economic experiment, a social experiment, and an administrative experiment that gave us the system that we had. So they set up what was called the Mahalbari system, which was based on allocating rights to specific tribes or families. And that, I think, provides a very important part of the context, that the jointness of rights as embedded in the family was ingrained in the land revenue or the land rights allocation mechanism. The other important thing to actually recognize about this experiment was that, contrary to other parts of India, where the British pushed for religious personal law, in our part of Punjab and in parts of KP, the British actually didn't push for Muslim personal law or religious personal law, but they adopted customary law. So this was the law of tribes. And one feature of customary law in West Punjab was that women were, for most tribes, according to the custom of most tribes, women were actually disinherited from holding property. And therefore, property got enshrined not just in the family, but in the males of the family. And that basically was the foundation of the patriarchal order as it got established in Punjab and in parts of KP. Now, of course, in the 30s, then you had the enactment and the institutionalization of the Sharia Act, which basically brought these rights or these indicative rights into the domain of Islamic law, and women sort of got a claim. But this journey of about 80 or 70 years basically has set about a whole host of norms, which have started to create a whole lot of problems. One, as Ikram is saying, that the whole land rights system was basically all it was telling you is that who is the revenue payee to the state, and by indirect inference, the revenue payee to the state is the person who holds the land. But in effect, basically, the possession of land was the de facto claim that was recognized at every part in the settlement. And the second thing that was there was that women actually were disinherited. So these norms of jointness, which then have got, given rise to social networks that protect these claims, and then basically you have norms where, even though women now have a claim on familial property, but there are familial norms and customs that actually arise where the expectation is that they would forego these claims. And over the years, basically, those things have remained, pretty persistent. But what we're now seeing, and we see this now a lot in Punjab, we're seeing it a lot as economic pressures are changing, as basically a lot of families are diversifying occupation, people are leaving their villages, that this whole system of informal regulation of land, which underpinned basically this edifice of formal structure that was keeping these norms going, is come under conflict. So when people just leave the village, they want some claim against the land that belongs to them. And you now have a whole host of conflicts that start to arise within families, a lot of which lands up in litigation. If you actually look at a lot of violence that triggers is connected to land rights. And it's very interesting. I mean, Shandana Momand is not here, but she and I were doing some field work about 10 years ago. And we were sitting on a, sort of sunny morning, December morning in Charsada with four brothers. And we were taking the history of land ownership of their family. And they just had four brothers and no sisters. And when it came to the distribution of the land that they got, it was unequal. And I remember I was sitting there, another uh, sort of colleague, then a student, Hassan Javed, was sitting in opposite corners of the room, and sort of we sort of caught a look, and the eldest brother saw us, and he said, "So what's the confusion?" So he said, I'll tell you what your confusion is. As we said, okay, what's our confusion? He said, you're asking what happened to Sharia, right? That's your question. So we said, yes, that's our question. He said, well, what happened to Sharia in our family's case is that the law of Pathan has dominated the law of Sharia. And because in Charsadda, there was no, the customary tribal custom was not about equal division among sons. So the eldest brother would actually get a larger share. So now that's a set of claims which people rely on to force familial settlements, right? But the other part of the story, which I think we're going to unpack, is that when somebody dies, basically the principle, the administrative principle that's taken root is that the whole land becomes joint property of everybody. So all parcels of land basically get all the familial claimants attached to it. So those parcels are not partitioned, and the title ownership to those partition parcels is not assigned. In fact, every parcel of land gets jointly owned, and the only way to actually partition it is to go through a very complex judicial process, which reminds me of this great novel by Charles Dickens called Bleak House, which told the story of a case which lasted for 7 generations called Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, which had killed more inhabitants than it had blessed, you see. And that is the travail of property and the legal system in Punjab. And unless fundamentally the right structure is changed, I think what this is going to do is continue to lead to embittered conflicts, which are also going to turn violent. There's going to be a lot of capital stuck up in courts. There's going to be a lot of dead capital that the economy has to carry. So I think the way forward is basically changing the law in a way which is consistent, of course, with the religious personal law that exists, but actually moves everything towards partitioning and titling. So I think that's part of the conversation that's happening.
Thank you. So this is a nice segue into Ms. Fauzia Viqar's remarks, and I know that she's also done a lot of work championing the collection and publication of gender disaggregated data on this question. And so I'll turn it over to you to speak about some of the gendered context of this topic.
I think, Sarah, whatever was said before me really sets out the context. And Dr. Cheema has also talked about patriarchy. Um, One of the problems with our access to property rights in Pakistan is that it depends on your socioeconomic background. So it is not just a problem of gender, it is a problem of the weak versus the powerful, as they say. Whoever has the resources tends to control the patwari, and that's the person who gets it. Women, unfortunately, have this inherent disadvantage still, which flows from the patriarchal system, not just in terms of access to resources, but even in terms of how that translates into access to mobility, the ability to talk to the revenue officials or influence them. And one of the things that marginalizes them now, as it did earlier, is feudalism, which is hale and hearty anywhere in Pakistan, because it is still 5% owning about three-fourths of the land in Pakistan, or at least two-thirds of the land in Pakistan. And that feudalism protects the interest of a few, and that is a few males. Because historically, also, whether it was trying to protect or strengthen the Mahalwari system or the Zamindari or the Rayatwari system, the laws conferred privilege on the male. For instance, the Land Tenancy Act of 1887, it talks about how the males who have inherited or who own the land for the past 20 years or so will have land occupancy rights. It specifically uses the word male. That translates into how we think about land and how male ownership of land is entrenched. That has a spillover effect into how generally even the law enforcers or the state thinks about access to and ownership of property rights. And I feel like now that is a bigger problem. Our statutory limitations may have been addressed a little bit. It is the mindset which governs the revenue system, which continues to plague women's access to property rights specifically. And I'm going to refer more to that. Because ultimately, what is happening today? Only 3% women were able to inherit land or property, according to the Pakistan Demographic and Health Survey. And less than 3% women own land in Pakistan or any kind of property. The law, yes, it is unequal because a woman gets half a share of the man. But the problem again is not with the fact that the access or the right is unequal. It is that the access to that half a share is our bigger problem. That's where, even referring to my previous work on property rights or generally resources, control over resources, we found out that it is really the inability to access the statutory right, which is a challenge, not just in property rights, but even in what rights can be secured through marriage, for instance. Because there was a research that we did on nikah registrars in collaboration with SERP, and in that we tried to understand what was happening, how was women's not just ability to get the delegated right of divorce, but also how were women's economic rights getting secured through the nikah nama, as they say. And it was found out that the state functionary, the public functionary, the nikah registrar was responsible for that deprivation because of two reasons. One, he did not believe in it. There were 39,000 nikah registrars in Punjab at that time, in the 36 tehsilein of Punjab. And in that, we found that it was always a male, although there is no legal limitation on that being a female. But the Nikah registrar was your biggest impediment. He did not believe, A, in the fact that women should be married at 16. He felt that it should be at the time of attaining puberty. B, that they had the right to decide their fate in terms of delegated right of divorce. Or secondly, his ability to capture whatever property rights were conferred in the Nikah because the Nikah provides a space for specific conditions in which you can say this, that, or the other property. Whenever the Nikah was filled, that was left out through the collusion, perhaps, or ignorance at best. But wherever it was filled, that's where it did not capture the specifics. Because if I decide, or if one of the gentlemen here decides to give a plot of land in DHA that belongs to your father to your wife, then naturally that is not going to devolve on the wife once a divorce happens, or once the dower is given, or wherever it is given. So that was our bigger problem. Now, in my current role as the federal ombudsperson, I have two mandates. One is to protect women, no, protect everyone from harassment at the workplace. So men, women, and transgendered. But the second part, and why I guess I'm here today, is protection of property rights of women in Islamabad Capital Territory. There I find that women are raising a voice against that deprivation. They want their inheritance rights and property rights. They rebel against the customary norms which deprive them. But not only does their family deprive them, because the family knows it can, when she goes to the revenue officials, they are responsible for that deprivation primarily. Even though there is a law which is called Enforcement of Women's Property Rights Act of 2020, which is a special law which gives a fast track access to rights. But still, the challenges and the impediments are so much that she cannot get access to her rights still. So the norms, yes, they are alive and well, fueled by feudalism, which is even more alive and well, and resulting in not just the social deprivation, but most importantly, the legal, uh, partly, but institutional barriers to access of women, which set the context today for that deprivation. I think that's all.
I'll turn it over to Mr. Khalid Ishaq to speak about the legal context.
Thank on the agricultural land, then the Land Acquisition Act, and then some settlement laws, what has happened to our settlement laws. So, touching the first segment of my brief, urbanization of agricultural land. So, in the just very recent past, it was a shocking revelation for me that apart from Lahore, there is no concept of master planning for the districts of Punjab. So we have heard about the brown area or the green area, but practically there was no master planning in any of the districts of the Punjab. And consequently, what has happened is from 1993 to 2023, I'll just quote few examples. Like Gujranwala is one of the most fertile agricultural areas in our in the central Punjab. So it comprised of eight almost 900,000 of agricultural land in 1993, and by 2023 we have squeezed it to 700,000 of agricultural land because of the fact that there was no master planning there. Everybody was having his own chunk of agricultural land converting into industrial land, housing societies, and so on and so forth. And this is not just the Gujranwala. It has happened to, with the same sequence, it has happened to the Sialkot, it has happened to the Sahiwal, Okada, Khanewal, Vehadi, DG Khan, Muzaffargarh. So almost in all these districts, 10% of the land consumed from the agricultural chunk to the urbanization. And the most ironic part was that yes, we are a growing society. We know need more households. We need housing societies also. But most painful part of that was that yes, if I have converted 100 acres of land from agriculture to a housing segment, out of that converted housing segment land, only 10% was the occupied. All other 90% was going down to the investment drain. To uh, there was nobody asking them that if we, yes, in these 20 years, if we are converting 10% of our agricultural land to the urbanization, have you ever calculated how much household units you need? Nobody calculated that. If we needed 100 houses, 100 houses of one canal each, we converted 100,000 canals of land into housing societies. So that has happened for the first time now that with Ikram is here, that Pulse program is going on. There's a special train, Punjab special uh, act is there's a draft in the making also which prohibits now that every brown area will stay as not as brown, but this will make the authorities will make sure the legal intervention is so long as the legal intervention is concerned, the authorities will make sure. I'll just quote Lahore's example. So if somebody is conceiving a housing society in the area of Raiwind, and it is inevitable to conceive a housing society there, the law will intervene and the law will require the developer that, sir, in the Raiwind side, we have lot more than required educational institution available at our disposal. Now, if you want to conceive a housing society here at Raiwind area, we want you to conceive a society where predominantly you will give us the health related facilities, because we do not have the health related facilities at the Raiwind end. So, and then on the same touch, if we are conceiving a housing society here at the Jallo end, and at the Jallo end, there are no educational institutions as compared to the Raiwind end. So it will be mandatory for the housing developer, a gentleman coming for an idea with an idea to conceive a housing society there, to invest in the education sector, and then in so on and so forth. Or jahan pe where there are no industries or there are more industries, we will enforce and we will put them to bring more such rationalized ideas to according to our needs, not that's rampant housing societies with no. And then there's another idea intervention, and we are working on it, that what used to happen was, Justice Shah is sitting there uh, in the courts, they deal it every day, that amenity plots are being converted into residential use. What we are now trying to do is that if a gentleman comes with the housing scheme and says that this will be a housing scheme having 100 canals of park, what they normally do is कि वो जहाँ से they excavate the land, or there are high tension wires going on, dedicated those 100 canals, कि "Oh, this is the 100 canals of land." We will now make sure that they will allocate the 100 canals of land for the green area where we want them to allocate the 100 canals of land, and we will put them to pay the money to develop that 100 canals of green area, and we will develop that. Similarly, the same sequence will apply on the schools, on the educational institutions. We have seen that in almost every society, either there were no schools, no graveyards there, and if they were there, those were converted into residential plots. Now they will provide us the funds, and we will build those schools or those hospitals or those educational institutions, and we will run that. So this was just a chunk of that urbanization to this land acquisition thing. Justice Shah would remember that there was a idea conceived. Let me confess, I'm also one of the beneficiaries. There was an idea conceived in Islamabad for developing a housing society for the lawyers and the legal fraternity. That was challenged before Islamabad High Court, and just Atar Manillah authored a landmark judgment, and I will quote one line from that judgment, because I myself is an agriculturist. I am from a village. I can imagine कि जहाँ पे मेरी 3 नस्लें जो हैं वो दफन हैं, अगर कोई आके वहाँ पे कोई हाउसिंग सोसाइटी बनाने की बात करेगा तो वो कितना पेनफुल होगा मेरे लिए. सर जस्ट अतर मैनल्ला जस्ट struck that down process, और उन्होंने वो एक लैंडमार्क उसमें जो लिखा, and we all know that you cannot rob the Peter to pay Paul. So what our Supreme Court did, they just set aside that judgment, and that housing society is in existence. So land acquisition itself, this was a land acquisition. अब उसमें land acquisition can be for the companies also, for the private companies also. So what practically is happening, this is I've been able to at least thwart one such attempt. There was an idea conceived in Lahore that we need to develop a garment city here. And I noticed that certain influential people, they started purchasing land around that vicinity even before that idea was finalized. With the help of Ikram and some other revenue officials, I called them in and I said, "What is happening there?" He said, "Sir, this is a standard operating procedure. Now they have conceived this chunk of land for developing an industrial estate there, and they are buying area around this land. What will they do is the government will provide the funds for developing infrastructure, roads, sewerage, and everything leading towards that that industrial estate, and in the vicinity they will develop their own housing societies. So at the cost of poor people of this province and this country, the land acquisition is going on. Nobody actually feels about this land acquisition. My view about land acquisition act having those provisions containing the land acquisition possible for the private companies was, it was for the company Bahadur. It was not for these companies. Yes, we cannot completely eradicate that concept. हमने grow करना है, हमें ज़रूरत है उन चीज़ों की भी. But what we have done now is, in the very recent past, we have in Punjab at least, I've made my best efforts to bring federation on it, but वो चौका नहीं हो सका. So we have set up a committee, and we are going to revise our land acquisition act on the parameters of the world's best land acquisition acts. हमें ज़रूरत है. The public purpose will definitely prevail over the private concerns, but under the garb of that public purpose, are we not haunting much more than what we are reaping in the form of benefits? Third part is the settlement laws. अब settlement laws पे भी what has happened to us is, जिस तरह आपने कहा कि वो उस settlement बनी, in 1947 we brought about some ordinance vis-a-vis the settlement for those people who were forced to migrate from India to Pakistan and who had left their lands and houses and businesses there. So the Indian legislatures, they also brought in the laws. they ended up in the 50s. हमारे यहाँ वो लैंड सेटलमेंट के लॉज जो हैं, वी ब्रॉट इन अ रिपील एक्ट इन 1974 and we left a lacuna there. I'm intentionally using that word lacuna there, that only those claims will be processed from henceforth which are pending claims. So what we have done to the pending claims is that if I am a greedy person, I somehow managed to uh, manage the clerk of the settlement department and just dropped in my antedated application there, and this is a pending claim. So that pending claim has not left us anywhere. In this 1.5 year being as an advocate journal, i have I have defended these cases in Supreme Court, in High Court, and I can tell you without mincing my words that in almost 25 cases, I have not come across one genuine claimant who is putting his hand on the most valuable, precious land of this country, of this province. Other day, Asghar Lagari is sitting here, the famous Asghar Lagari case is there. Under the garb of settlement, a property in the Mason Road worth about 1 billion rupees was almost gone. And वो जो लोग जिनका originally ये claim था, they are not there. Their claims are being purchased by the most influential people in our society. They have the means and resources to influence everyone. And I would say everyone, executive, judiciary, politicians, and their lust is not ending anywhere. So उसके ऊपर भी we are now bringing some कुछ और एक legislation, कुछ इकराम के साथ मिलके भी हम कर रहे हैं, वो पल्स का लॉ जो है वो आएगा, कुछ हम सेटलमेंट्स को खत्म करने जा रहे हैं, and there should be an end to this. So this was briefly what I thought I should share with you. We can do. Thank you.
So we've set the context, and now we're going to turn to some debate. So we're going to start by, I think, focusing on the specific aspect of the Pulse program related to partition of joint holdings. And I'm going to ask first Mr. Ikram to please give us a little bit of detail about this partitioning and the experiences with it so far, the pilot that has gone on in Sahibal. And then I'm going to ask the rest of the panelists to respond to the positive and negative potential of the partitioning process and the potential for it to lead to disputes, to perpetuate in some ways the power hierarchies that we've been talking about, and possibly to end on a positive note, think about what are some of the ways in which there's room in the law to remedy or correct for these. So we'll start with you, Ikram Saab. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me just introduce Pulse to you. Pulse is Punjab Urban Land Systems Enhancement. It is a World Bank funded project worth about 150 million euros. It started in 2022, and it is actually a sequel to our previous project that World Bank worked on with us. There was a land record management information system under which the land records of Punjab province were digitized. So, what were the results of that project? Like, we started off in 2009 and we completed that project in 2016. And Punjab Land Records Authority was conceived after that because, like, the entire land has been digitized, and now how to give services over there, how to do corrections on whatever faults were found out. So it was like 150 years old record. When brought into the digital system, it had its own problems and challenges. You put in wrong data into the system, it's going to stay wrong unless you have some mechanism to put it right. So while our traditional revenue, lowest tier of revenue system, which is Patwari, he did not have this revenue record anymore. He had this, this power to present the case to the high ups, because nobody in the entire hierarchy unfortunately has so much time and expertise in going into those details. So this was the point where Patwari started exploiting the problems in the revenue record. And in the initial those years, 2017, 18, 19, maybe even to some extent even today, when there is some kind of problem in those revenue records, the way you have to get that resolved is much more difficult than what it was back in the manual days of land records. So this project was conceived to clear all those gaps, to complete the digitization of those areas which were left out, to create records of urban areas. As I said earlier in my previous conversation, since the land record system was created for land revenue, the urban areas initially were never, mapped by the British, and they have never been mapped so far. This is what we call the areas called Abadi De. So in the revenue maps, it is mentioned as Abadi De, which means it has got no record. Whoever occupies a piece of land is the owner. So we are now going to create those records, and then we are also going to create records of private housing societies. Otherwise, we don't have the records of those housing societies as well. So one Pulse is doing, it is filling up all the gaps of all those the gaps missed out in the previous land record project. Second, it is creating the digital records. And third, it is converting the land ownership system from joint ownerships to a parcel based system where every single parcel will be partitioned and every owner will be associated with the parcel. So why is this important is because over the generations, like the British system was pretty much comprehensive given the time. So they had settlement and consolidation process after every 25 years, and we stopped doing that. The last settlement that happened in Punjab was in somewhere in 1950s. Since then, we did not have any settlement. And what settlement does is it creates a separate, like, a separate holding for every individual. So the joint holdings are finished off, and a separate holding is created. And now in 2024, we have joint holdings where, like, there are more than 5,000 people in one joint holding. So it's like 10 canals of land, and the owners are in thousands. And many of, like, most of them, of course, are, they've already sold it out, and we cannot associate every individual with the land records right now. So what we are going to do is partitioning the entire land records. In urban areas, it is both, like, easy as well as challenging. Easy is because the possessions are clear, the houses are built, so we just have to we are doing surveys in those cities, and we are putting stickers, some good quality stickers on the houses, and people can, scan those stickers and access our land record, and whatever information they find there, if it is correct, fine, they can give their feedback. If it's wrong, and then on the challenging part in the urban areas is there are people who have got no records, and they're sitting there for maybe decades. So that's the challenging part of it. On the rural sides, the issue is more about the old system. So when we go for partitioning, 90% people welcome us, and 10% people are putting up resistance, and they can go to any extent to make sure that partition doesn't happen. And one of the reasons is, like, the only reason is, they are occupying more place than they own actually. And in many cases, that is what Madam Fauzia Viqar has said. It's not about gender alone, it's about weak and powerful as well. So the weaker people, they own land in records, but they do not have possession on ground. They have been running from pillar to post, but they are unable to get possession. So partitioning is solving that problem to some extent. We started off as a pilot project in Sahiwal. We have reached almost 75% there. We have also started off in other districts as well. So Okada is the second one where we started off with this. Why that region? Because in Sahiwal and Okada, land records are fairly better shaped than rest of the country. So, for example, in Lahore, the land records are a mess. In Gujranwala, it's in Sheikhupura, it's totally a mess. So all these cities, the land records are very, very complex. In this region of Sahiwal, Okada, the land records are fairly good. So we started off from there just to experience what's, like, the lessons that we can learn from there. And then this January onwards, we are going to have a full-scale partitioning exercise across Punjab. This will be linked with the digital maps. So even now, if you can go on Pulse website, uh, www.lis.gop.pk, not probably HTTPS, sorry. So you'll find out and go to Sahiwal, you can find out, like, you can click on a parcel and you can see the ownership details. So far, we are, like, opening up this detail just for feedbacks. Otherwise, we'll later on, because of confidentiality, we'll be, like, closing off the details of ownerships. So The purpose is every single individual owner can find out his or her land on the map and then give us feedback where an intervention is required or any change is needed. So the problems, yes, we have problems, but only where people are occupying more lands than they own over there. And what is being put up as the problem is like they're creating hurdles and saying Patwari is not doing it rightly, or for that matter, so many other reasons. But the good part is uh, we have almost disposed of all the appeals which were brought up because most of them were frivolous. So we are expecting we'll complete this partitioning exercise by the end of 2026, and we are targeting 80% of Punjab. Why 80%? Because it's not possible to do 100%, given the parcel sizes are going to be very small. We also want to make sure uh, we have an access path for every single parcel individually, and that access path is in the name of the government. So this is the entire scheme of partitioning. Pulse also has many other components, like we are creating 3D maps as well. We're working on that part to make sure the government revenue, the taxes on property, etc., we get the right taxes. We are also working on integration of our data with other departments like health, education, food department. So we want to make sure when we see a particular uh, parcel of land, we have readily available information: what is constructed on this, who owns that parcel, what is the amenity number, even the electricity number is going to be linked with that, the gas meter number is going to be linked with that, the business that is running over there, whether it is rental or not, everything is going to be linked into that. So Pulse overall has a huge scope, but I think it's just relevant over here to discuss about partitioning. So that is going to be hopefully completed by 2026 max.
So I'm going to just ask the rest of the panelists comment on what they see as the potentials and pitfalls of partitioning,
Specifically partition?
or any of the aspects of pulse that.
So ownership of land generally, right? In any way. Because I was earlier told that I should talk a little bit more about challenges for women. So I think I'm going to make it a little bit broader. But just to latch on to Ikram's sub's discussion on partition, let me narrate a personal story. Um, my parents had a parcel of land that was our hereditary land, and a housing society took that land over, and they asked us to sell that to them, which my father, being an army man, refused and stuck to it despite good offers. But anyway, that housing society had serious problems, ultimately was declared illegal, which is the case in the majority of housing societies in Pakistan. And interestingly, in front of CDA's building, you have big billboards talking about housing societies which have been declared illegal by CDA. So that is the impunity, the level of impunity. Anyway, so in order to get the land record, we had to, like jump various obstacles and ultimately got the land record with very clear title, no issues in the title. Then came, because it was a, as they say, mushtarika khata, joint ownership. So there was a whole process whereby we had to inform all the other owners and ultimately find out where our ultimately come to a partition of land, right? So that all was done, thankfully, very well. And the parcel of land was identified in the face of opposition from the housing society, the illegal housing society. But it still was because, we were lucky that we got support from the revenue staff. However, in order to get possession, which means building a wall around it specifically, this is after the partitioning, we require support from the police. I am supposed to get support from all the administration of Islamabad Capital Territory for execution of my orders in terms of property rights. I don't have enough influence because this is not a case that I brought to my own office. And I don't want to use that office. So I haven't been able to get the police to go and enforce that right, which is established beyond any doubt. That is your problem. And on the ground, per se, illegal housing societies Kabza mafia, the importance of muscle over right. So that is it. But just bringing it back to what can be done. Again, taking the benefit of a very esteemed Supreme Court judge here, Justice Shah, the backlog in the judiciary is really killing it, especially for women. 2.26 million cases which are backlogged, and unfortunately, they resolve it, and the entire judiciary from district to the superior judiciary, and it comes back up, and it becomes more than the last year. So that is the big problem. That, Justice Shah, again, can be sorted out a little bit because we are dealing with that particular issue. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of common sense. So if there's an application, if there is a case, sorry about that, not you particular at all. I shouldn't say particular. Sometimes a case of property comes up, and you know that a particular institution or a particular individual should be a party to that case because the record shows you. The judge has the responsibility to add all the necessary parties, as they say, or to determine who is a necessary party or not a necessary party. But that gets conveniently overlooked. A decree is made, and then a party is invoked, and that has to be pleaded all over again. So that becomes a serious problem afterwards. Such measures can help improve the situation to reduce the backlog. Secondly, digitization is extremely important. I'm glad that in Punjab it's happening, but the Ombudsperson in Punjab has over 5,000 cases which have not even reached that partition level, or if when they have, they haven't been able to sort them out because of these extraneous factors. So how are you going to deal with that? Patwari still has to to verify the record, right? So that is where he has the access to. Magar aksar, if you notice that an incorrect khasra is added in the fard, so that is another problem. वो आपके जो real problems हैं. So how एक तो digitization must happen, because I feel like that is the best way to democratize access to property rights. Secondly, it must be done correctly, because you don't have to start all over again and go to get your correct khasra added to it. उसके साथ-साथ लॉज़ को भी मेरे ख़्याल से अमेंड करने की बाकी पाकिस्तान में ज़रूरत है, बिकॉज़ लैंड रेवेन्यू एक्ट इन पंजाब वाज़ अमेंडेड इन 2012 एंड देन इन 2014 15, जिसके तहत एक सिंपल सी बात हुई थी, स्पेशली एम्पावरिंग फॉर वुमेन. The revenue official was given the power under 135A to initiate partition after mutation was sanctioned. जिसकी वजह से फ़ायदा ये हो जाता है कि कम से कम एक डंडा तो है ना, अगर लोग नहीं उसको इस्तेमाल करते तो इट स्टिल वर्क्स आउट, एंड दैट इज़ empowering for the institutions like myself, which can then use that. It's not available, that particular advantage is not available elsewhere. Similarly, electronic means of either notice serving or hearings, that is decreed through judgments, but it is not part of the law yet. In Punjab, it was done through the PLRA 2015 amendment, I believe, in section 24. But otherwise, we need it in the rest of the country so that access becomes easier and faster and nicer. In terms of women, what we also need is broader access to rights, which means, for instance, the laws which have come in, like laws on representation, the quotas of the world, whether it is in employment or it is in the assembly or elsewhere, that has helped. Bringing women on the table has certainly helped empower, or rather help spread the voice of the women, and highlight their lived realities. So have those laws implemented correctly wherever they are. Again, I'm speaking for Punjab because you rightly pointed out that I was heading the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women. So many laws at that time came which helped women. 33% women in every board, committee, and task force of a public sector company. It helps, you know, because I am better able to talk about women's issues than the best gender advocate right next to me, which is Dr. Ali Cheema, is still, because it's not part of his lived reality. Similarly, you had other laws on just things like family law, the family laws, the enactments rather, or amendments in family laws, which helped empower the women elsewhere. Um, recording, accurate recording, some policy and some implementation measures. For example, like I said earlier, accurate recordings in the Nikah Nama and the Talaq Nama also, which will empower women. New laws like matrimonial property right, that I feel is essential. When a woman, especially when she gets divorced, it's arbitrary. She doesn't walk away with even a rupee because she has no right. Matrimonial property rights is an area where we are seriously lacking. There is no protection for a woman upon divorce. So, at least if she had access to that property which was created in the life of the marriage, because she does have some contribution, even if she's not bringing money from outside, she does have that contribution. So that's a law that we need apart from all of that. I think finally it's extremely important to sensitize individuals in institutions like the revenue offices, Nadra for instance, which is pretty good, but still, it decline, in order to get access to your inheritance or property, whatever, right, you have to get a succession certificate. Nadra gives that. One of the family members objects to it, or decline certificate aa jata hai. What do? Then you just sit, wait for everybody's goodwill to be able to get that. So sensitized individuals who can find ways out is extremely important. In courts, have those people who will help women and others navigate the system better. And please, not just ban illegal housing societies, but make sure that that is implemented, because that is the bane of our existence at this point in time. Thank you.
Just to share the problem, actually, the illegal housing societies, I have data before me, and this pertains to only 11 districts of Punjab. So total housing schemes in these 11 districts, because center Punjab ke mostly areas hain, so I don't need to name them, 2,870 housing schemes. Out of those 2,870 housing scheme, only 1,073 housing schemes are approved. Illegal housing schemes, 1,797. And the most, the critical part is, out of those 1,797 illegal housing schemes, 666 are in the agricultural zone. So these are just the 11 districts. So coming back to what Ikram sir was saying, if Ikram can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is based on what Ikram's briefings over the last few months to me. So what he's trying to do, what the Pulse is trying to do, you have excise department here in Punjab, you have its website. You enter your website on your cellular phone or laptop or wherever you have the access available to internet. You enter the number of the vehicle, LXZ16127, and the screen pops up: who purchased it, who owns it, what are the controversies, conflicts attached to these vehicles, how many token tax paid, how many income tax paid, what is due, what is payable. The idea behind the Pulse is that every property in Punjab, at least, has a specified identified number. You put in that number in that website, and everything flashes out that this is the status of the property. It has a dispute, it has a litigation, it is divided, it is undivided, land revenue paid, not paid, all that. This is one segment of that. The second, which is e-registration, I think Ikram forgot to mention that. E-registration is very, very important. What used to happen was that if I own just one canal of land and I go to my revenue officer, which is Patwari, he issues me the FER of one canal. And when I go to a lawyer or a scribe, instead of sorry, instead of putting one canal in the property document, in the title document, initially he will put in one canal of property. The registrar or the registrar staff will look into it, and we somehow manage to make it 10 canals, because this is manual. The registrar shuts his eyes or his muharrir shuts his eyes, and instead of I am having a further of one canal, but on my title document he just inscribes it 10 canal, or I myself do it. Ek zero hi add karna na, zero is of no value otherwise. So what Ikram is now doing, e-registration pay, that if you want to sell your property or purchase a property, you do not have to go to revenue officer. You have the revenue record digitalized, mind it, not digitized, because जो मैडम बात कर रही थी, digitization में there was a problem. Patwari used to take a snapshot and put it on the system. The reflection of that ownership is one canal, and on the same evening he puts up another snapshot, and this is just one marla, and then you are at the hands, at the mercy of the patwari or the revenue officer. So what Ikram or the Pearl system is doing, that you do not need now a fard from the patwari. You will incorporate your details at the website, and your website will reflect that you are owner of this much of property, and you will not have your handwritten title document, the registry, which we usually call it. It will only be printed by an automation system. And if you are trying to put 10 canals against one canal's ownership, this will not practically be possible. The printout of on a stamp paper or on a particular paper will only come out if your property is free of disputes, if your ownership is in accordance with what you are trying to sell, if it is divided, if it is partitioned. So these problems will resolve actually the number issue in the courts. I think Justice Shah, this is the first time that I am probably advocating this idea. I think we are taking these number things overwhelmingly. We cannot, in a society like ours in Punjab, we are a litigious society. If we keep on wasting our energies in showing that yes, in 2025 January the Supreme Court has 58,000 number of cases, and now I have brought down those cases to 48,000, I don't think that's a success. We need to eradicate those reasons which provide you the numbers in the courts, because this is my personal experience. It has happened many times that a client has come to me and I've told him कि तुम्हारा केस नहीं बनता, and he said sir तुसी कर दो, दूसरा वकील ते करेगा, then you will be in the courts for 10 years. In a litigious society like ours, we should not be overwhelmed with the numbers. द रूट कॉज, और वो रूट कॉजेज जो हैं, लाइक पार्टीशन का अगर प्रॉब्लम रिजॉल्व हो जाता है, तो दिस विल नॉट ओनली रिड्यूस द नंबर ऑफ सिविल लिटिगेशन इन अवर कोर्ट्स. द criminal data shows that 40 to 50% of the disputes, and where the people get actually killed at the end of the day, that initiates from these partition disputes. So agar wo ho jayega, to probably the numbers will also be okay, and वो जो हमारा law and order का मसला है वो भी resolve होगा. And the last thing, जो which is I think Shah Saab's very close to Shah Saab's heart, that is reconciliation, and reconciliation through arbitration, through a ADR. Why I say that? So if we have an ADR system in place in this country and in Punjab, and a judge, you and me are locked in litigation, and a judge sends you, and I have sued you in a case, and you are defended through a lawyer. If a judge sends me to an ADR, and there are even 20% cases resolved through an ADR, that is not the 20%. That is actually 80%. Why? Because if my case is resolved in ADR, I or the other side will not go and appeal. Nobody will go in the revision. Nobody will file a constitutional petition. Nobody will file a CPLA before the Supreme Court. So just imagine, just calculate that 20% with the kind of litigation which will ensue if the dispute is not settled. So ADR is probably the answer to that. And these major issues of partitions and all that is probably the answer to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ji. So I think जो Dr. Fauzia ने जो बात की, and she said, made a statement which I think encapsulates it all. She said digitalization must happen, but it must happen correctly. So the devil is not in digitalization, it is in making digitalization happen correctly. So what is it, about correct digitalization? And in some sense, again, history matters. जिस तरह इकराम साहब ने कहा कि अंग्रेज इस्तेमाल करते थे हर 25 साल बाद. तो जब पहली लैंड सेटलमेंट भी हुई तो उन्होंने कैसे इस्तेमाल किया कि उन्होंने सारे जो फैमिलीज थी और ट्राइब्स थी एक गांव में उनको बिठा लिया और कहा कि हम आप पे राइट्स असाइन करना चाहते हैं। और फिर जॉइंटनेस की प्रॉब्लम शुरू हो गई और वो 25 साल बाद आए और उन्होंने फिर सबको बैठा लिया। तो उसको खाता दुरुस्त करने की एक्सरसाइज, दैट्स व्हाट इट वाज कॉल्ड, राइट? So I think one missing piece of the puzzle in all of this is okay, right now, what is the role of the community in this digitalization? How that relationship is going to be structured is going to be pretty fundamental. And the reason for that is in the absence of that, the only thing you can fall back on is the right of possession. तो अगर मैं अपने ख़ानदान में गांव में बैठा हुआ हूँ, मेरे भाई बहन बाहर चले गए, मैंने सब ज़मीन की पोजेशन ले ली, बहनें शादी करके बाहर चली गई, भाई प्रोफेशनल बन गया, वो भी बाहर चला गया, ज़मीन का तो कब्ज़ा मैंने सब हासिल कर लिया। तो अगर आके आपने राइट ऑफ पोजेशन के बेसिस पे समरी एग्जीक्यूशंस करनी है तो शायद खाता तो दुरुस्त हो जाए बट वो लोगों के इमेजिनेशन में जस्ट नहीं होगा। और अगर वो लोगों की इमेजिनेशन में जस्ट नहीं होगा तो आगे मसले फिर भी आते रहेंगे और वो लोग जो है उसकी एक सॉर्ट ऑफ फंडामेंटल बैकलैश होगा उसके ऊपर। सो आई थिंक दैट particularly when it comes to women, one of the big things is, and we're doing some, Ikram knows this, some surveys in the same area, Jahan Pe Pulse project, so Sahiwal mein. And one of the big things is just like there is asymmetry in information between men and women who know about what is going on. So, that's where I'm saying that jo aap baat karte hain about doing it correctly, that we have to start to really lay down that what are the information failures. And if there are information failures, and I would say, we have to think beyond information failures, and also think about engagement failures. I may be informed, but I may not feel enabled to engage. And if engagement is, again, gender unequal, and by the way, I agree with Fauzia and with Ikram, okay, it is about the power of the powerful and the weak, but I think we're very loose about saying who's powerful and who's weak. In my view, in this landscape, the people who are powerful are the people who have the social capital and the possession of land in that ecosystem. But within the same family, those who don't have either the social capital or who don't have possession are the weak, basically. So how are we going to provide justice to them? Because over there has to be some retribution or some sort of compensation in terms of what's going to happen. So I think so. So how do we structure engagement? And that's about how do we mobilize community. अब वो प्रॉब्लम ये है कि कम्युनिटी के जो मैकेनिज्म्स थे वो हमने सारे ख़त्म कर दिए। जो गांव में मैकेनिज्म्स होते थे, जो पंचायत के सिस्टम्स थे, वो तो सब अनरावल हो गए। लोकल गवर्नमेंट का कोई हम फ्रेमवर्क लेके नहीं आए, तो वो भी कोई रूटेड फ्रेमवर्क नहीं है, तो वो भी एक वैक्यूम है वहाँ पे। So how do we kind of mobilize this? I think has to be a de novo activity. Now the worry over there is obviously also decentralization of these things is not a silver bullet because जो है powerful can capture those systems as well. So I think there's some thinking that needs to be done there. The third thing, so this information engagement, the third thing which I think is really important is again what Fauzia said. I think one big root cause of this whole problem is that the judicial system is dysfunctional, and it goes back. And but I don't agree with Advocate General Saab. हम उतने ही लिटिगस हैं जितने अंग्रेज थे, वो भी कम लिटिगस नहीं थे। 19वीं सदी में जब उनका कानून ठीक हो गया, उनके समरी सिस्टम्स ठीक हो गए, तो वो लेस लिटिगस हो गए। अब यहाँ पे वो ठीक कर दें तो यहाँ पे भी मसला हल हो जाएगा। अदरवाइज वही होगा जो कि मैंने पहले जिस नॉवल का वो तरफ इशारा किया था कि वो ब्लीक हाउस में वो जो क्लाइंट है वो फाइनली कहता है कि द बेसिक प्रिंसिपल ऑफ इंग्लिश लॉ इज टू मेक बिजनेस फॉर इटसेल्फ। So what better business than the litigation around land, right? That is the most fundamental piece of business in a settled agricultural society. तो वही यहाँ पे हो रहा है, it's just land values are going up. तो उस चीज को तोड़ने की वजह चाहे वो ADR हो चाहे ये स्टे वगैरह ख़त्म करें. But the one hears of cases, I heard about a case the other day of two brothers who have a dispute. They have two houses which they've inherited, they're joint properties, and it's taken them 3 years. The case is not settled, it's in court. I mean, you can't get like a simpler case to just sell the houses and give them money. I mean, just finish it. But it's just going to go carry on and a whole generation. So, but these are all can only be crafted in, I think, some very bold moves that are being done under Ikram about the way digitalization has been done, the way records are being interconnected. I think those could be great foundations, um, but their effectiveness can really go up if we can settle about what the partitioning principles are. I think that's an open question. I think information engagement, and Shah Saab talked about climate financing. I remember the days when he and I were talking about taxation, you see. But then we talked about local government. But now we need to, an equal crisis is the land crisis. And I think the judiciary, climate finance to mujhe kuch arse baad hi nazar aata. But if the judiciary cannot get this house in order, then I think it has deeply failed the society.
Right. Two questions, and we'll take a round of questions, and we started a little bit late, so we'll go until 1:10. So we have time for at least two rounds of questions. Okay. So I see three people in the middle. Let's start with the lady in front over here, and then you, sir, and you.
Thank you so much. An excellent panel.
And please introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Mehri Noon and I work at LUMS. I'm a director for partnerships and placements. Excellent panel, very important issues. Just wanted to any one of you to respond. I think a really important element, of course, the gender was addressed by Fauzia Viqar, but religious minorities were not mentioned at all. And I think that is such a serious issue. It is extremely sad that a number of, because religion, people are deprived of their property and the community itself is against that religion. So I think that's, if you could please, any one of you could respond to that question. What do we have in place for governance that will facilitate the religious minorities? Thank you.
Do you have a question? Yeah. We'll take that gentleman and then that row.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Askar Lagari. So my quick question is primarily from Ikram Saab, but I'm sure the other panelists can also have very valuable input on that. So जो बहुत ज़्यादा मुझे स्ट्रेस नज़र आया है डिजिटाइजेशन में भी वो एक्यूरेसी के ऊपर आया है बट लैंड लॉ लिटरेसी में एक बहुत बड़ा सवाल सिंप्लिफिकेशन का भी है एंड land law seems to be very complicated. I'm a legal practitioner, but that has always been my feeling about it. So, do you feel like it has to be this way, या इसमें simplification की भी गुंजाइश और ज़्यादा? If you could kind of have some on that.
You could just pass the mic back over there and then.
Bakaruddin, I'm a legal counsel and policy advisor, advising government and private sector. We talked about land rights and land rights in the context of commodifying land parcels, that how it can be turned into commodity which is easily traceable, transferable, and identifiable, having the effect of the right ownership and mechanism to do it. Dr. Ali talked about the role of the community. My question is, the land, is it something which needs to be distributed as a property for all, or it's something which have to be some higher principle for its right of usage? The reason, the way we are distributing land in the context of demography, is it going to be a time come when it become useless or it become a burden of a distribution by doing this way? It's a policy perspective to distribute the land the way we are doing it.
So we'll take that last question and then panel.
Assalamu alaikum, Ikram sir. I'm Arslan Chaudhary, public policy scholar. My question to you, there is a land acquisition. This question is according to Land Acquisition Act. Government is acquiring the land from for general public purpose or for the any purpose. There is a conflict between the two stakeholders. The first one, a person who is the victim, who is the owner of the land. Another is the government. There is a problem is that the DC rate is not actually matching with the person who is the landowner. What is the solution of it? The court is, you can say that there are many petitions in the courts. What is the solution of this? And another question for Sir, my question to you, there is a need to align the uh, courts, for example, revenue courts and civil courts and other courts. You can say that every case will be go to the civil court or Supreme Court, but we should try to manage align, just only give a power to the civil courts, to the land revenue courts, for example, judges. So what do you think about that? What types of the authorities we should to try to pursue to the lower level revenue courts, for example, assistant collector grade 1, and who is joining, and collector also. What we should to try to do, alignment in the law courts, and should be that just only specified the court, land court should be established in the Pakistan. This is the answer. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank questions on the table. One is about having to do with religious minorities, the issue of simplification of the law, the question of whether commodification of parcels is the correct principle, and then question of conflict of stakeholders with acquisition, and then on the alignment of different levels of courts. So anybody who wants to start off, maybe Ikram sir, there are a couple that were directed to you. So.
Okay, so about the religious minority thing, it's for the first time that under Pulse we are going to survey the people with the context of religion as well. So it was a big decision for us. We had very detailed discussions with World Bank. They actually wanted, one of the components that they always keep in their projects is the social justice and these things. So they wanted us to map the religious identity of the people, but we had the other concerns, like instead of safeguarding the people's rights, we were like afraid we may end up in creating problems for those people, because it's not always easy for people to disclose their uh, religion when it comes to the kind of society that we have. So if somebody is living in some mohalla for the past 10 years and nobody knows he's an Ahmadi, and one day you go and ask him like, what's your religion? And he has to like tell, I'm an Ahmadi, and the entire mohalla knows it. And so unfortunately this, or for that matter, Christians and Hindus and everybody. But we finally agreed with the logic presented by World Bank, because the inheritance rights are dependent upon the religion and even on the sect. So it's for the first time we are going to map that. We have established some protocols. How will we keep the data confidential, and it will be encrypted, and it will not be disclosed to anybody except the people themselves. So we are already working on that side. I think that should answer the question. The other part was about the simplification of land laws. Yes, that is being done. For example, as far as partitioning is concerned, the current law, the way it is right now, it doesn't allow us to start off partitioning. Suo partitioning is not allowed in the law right now. So we are introducing a new clause, 135AA, which allows the government, for that matter, we are giving the powers to the collector of the district. He can initiate the partitioning by himself under the Pulse project. So just in the morning, I was briefing AG that I'll be presenting changes in certain laws, some 6 laws that we have identified: Stamp Act, Registration Act, Land Revenue Act, Punjab Land Records Authorities Act, Rental Premises Act, and the Transfer of Immovable Property Act. So we'll be moving the amendments in all these laws in the next maybe a month or so, and we hope we'll be having this passed from the assembly within the next 2 months. Just to give you an example, very recently we have tried to bring an amendment into Registration Act because we wanted to provide services of land registration to overseas Pakistanis in Pakistani consulates. And it took us like 6 months in adding just 3 words in the law. And the words are, so there's like this clause in Registration Act which allows people not to present themselves personally before the sub-registrar. And there are exceptions that these people are exempted. So if like somebody is very ill, somebody is in prison, and somebody is some lady who observes parda, and then we had to introduce this fourth one, which was somebody who is overseas. There's 3 or 4 words, and it took us like 6 months to get it, despite all the efforts by the government itself. So actually it's about the process, the long process. So we'll hopefully within next 2 to 3 months, our laws amendment package should be in the assembly, and that is going to improve a lot of things. So as Registration Act was being, the e-registration was being mentioned by Advocate General, we brought in e-registration, but the current law also allows the manual registration. While through notifications and board directions, Board of Revenue has stopped e-registration, but what has stopped manual registration. But what if some sub-registrar is still doing manual registry? So he's basically, putting the people's property into danger. So we are going to change those laws to make them, in line with the latest practices we have adopted, the electronic sources of communication and storage of records. That's about the changes in law. And the third one is about land acquisition. And I'll be skipping this question about commodifying because I think somebody else on the panel will be taking this up. About the DC value, this is a very important question. And like, let me confess, we actually keep the DC value at a lower rate ourselves because the taxes, I believe, are very high on land transactions. As of now, when we speak, the tax by FBR on transaction of property is like 3% for somebody who is a filer, 6% for somebody who is a late filer, and 9% for somebody who's not a filer. So imagine if you sell a property or buy a property worth 10 million, so you'll be paying like 900,000 rupees just for one transaction. That's too much. And then add into it the tax that you pay to provincial government, the tax you pay to the municipality, and other service charges and those things. So it goes up to like around 17 to 18% taxes. This is our basic discord with the federal government. We are trying to convince FBR, and the result that we are seeing is because of this high taxation, people are avoiding the government channel of transacting properties, and they are transacting properties informally. And I'm like, whenever I talk to the FBR people and I tell them that just a few years down the road, these people will be again litigating, fighting, and there will be, God forbid, some murders over these lands because the on ground situation and the government records are different, and society will end up spending more money on policing, on the courts and everything, only because FBR was interested in few pennies of its taxes. So it's this reason that government in at provincial level, and it's in all the provinces, that governments keep the DC rates relatively low so that the the impact of taxation is like a little lesser. In an ideal world, I would want the DC rate to be exactly as per the market rate, and the FBR taxes to go down, maybe even 1/4 of what they are right now. So that is something an ideal thing, but I don't think we have reached at that point so far. So that is the reason. At the time of land acquisition, the government again has a process where we take 3 values: the DC rate, the market rate, and the transactional rates that are recorded in the system for the past 1 year. So there is some kind of safeguard, but I agree that is not a very effective safeguard. And then one more thing, sorry. That is the you know the supervisory bodies, the anti-grafting watchdogs, anti-corruption, and NAB. So when I was like additional deputy commissioner in Natak, and we were purchasing land for this Hakla DI Khan motorway, and the market rate was 1 million per canal. And my Tahsildar and AC and everybody like proposed 1.5 lakhs per canal. And I was like, that's very low. And they said, do you want to go to NAB? And I was like, okay, so let the people go to court instead of me going to the NAB. So, these are again some of the hard realities.
This very much answers everything, but what you were referring to, my basic issue with the Land Acquisition Act is that you take over my property and then you tell its price in pennies, and then you want me to prove that no, 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 it's not that pennies, it's actually few rupees. So I, in an ideal world, I would want that if, and legally, when if you assert something, you prove something. Here, I am asserting that your property, which I am taking by force, is of 100 rupees. And then I want you to come to court while passing all those technical hitches, limitations, and then prove that no, it was not 100 rupees. It is unimaginable. And then what happens is that if somehow I am able and I manage to pull the strings at the right time and prove my case, then the judgments also come. These days, otherwise, the law in the Supreme Court these days is little too much favoring the landowners, because they have, the Supreme Court in the recent a couple of years, I think, they have directed the jurisprudence towards the future potential of land as well. So if a builder is acquiring my property, be it a public sector builder or private sector builder, for a housing society, what else evidence is required to prove that this property was worth of a future potential? That's taking this property for a housing society or for a mega project for a commercial market is in itself a proof that this land has a substantial future prospect. Coming back to that uh, one judgment I was referring to, so I looked into a case where the owner somehow managed to pull everything at the right time, at the right place, and prove that the future, the value of this land is this much. And the judgment says that no, you did not prove this properly because you have not produced the owners of that sale deed, which you have produced for reflecting that this my land's price was this much. So there are problems with that, and my idea about the land acquisition is that there should be a fair compensation act, like in India when they built Delhi metro or Mumbai metro. They brought in these laws, the fair compensation act. It should not be the land acquisition act. The acquisition part will be covered in that. Let's hope that we will be able to do it, but that will be resolved soon. And Askar, the laws will be complicated always, and like as Ikram has just said, we will be bringing some amendments. But my idea about is, I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Plato said it, law is simple if so were the men. We complicate the law. Law is never that complicated.
We'll just let them answer.
Why don't you take a couple more and then
Yeah, we'll take a couple of more and then we'll come back. Yeah, go ahead.
It's my question is to the Advocate General. It is with reference to partitioning. Is it, although it again requires some kind of a legal amendment or something, but if there could be some way of regulating the stay orders on the partitioning, because mostly the litigation elongates or on the stay orders, because people go in the, when there is a partition and somebody is not happy or something, they'll go to the resort to the civil court and get a stay order on it, and it would continue for years. Thank you.
I think I'm loud enough. We were just talking about land acquisition and agricultural property. So the biggest project I can think of is the Ravi uh, project and the agricultural land there.
And I think the High Court gave a very good judgment, and in the Supreme Court, it stayed. And I think it's the government's project. So if the government is talking about land acquisition, that's the project they should just stop on its own. Finish. Start where you're talking about, because I think that's the agricultural land. More than 70%. Fahad is arguing that more than 70% is agricultural land, which that supplies to Lahore and Kasur and all those areas. And you're going to transfer it for the rich who live outside Pakistan, not for the poor who are living here. No poor can buy land there. No poor can buy land there. It's not housing for the poor. It's land acquired from the poor for the rich. So the land acquisition laws should have been finished long time ago. I think in the region we are the only ones who haven't amended it. Sri Lanka has done it. India has done it. India has done it to a level. They've defined what public purpose. Public purpose can't be for the rich. And I think if the government really wants to do this, solve this problem.
Side from Protege Research. I'm a researcher myself. I'm just interested to, because there was a lot of talk about data quality and the devil's being in the detail. When you're sort of digitizing the land records, how do you sort of maintain and uphold data integrity on your end? Because I can imagine the data sources being very patchy. How do you sort of ensure that?
The critical answer actually. So you want the views of the Advocate General or Khalid?
The government, of course.
So the Khalid view is very clear. You cannot drop Peter to pay Paul. I've just mentioned it at the outset, and that's my view about every project being conceived with private lands, unless it is inevitable. We will be at a stage where the housing will be inevitable, but not in this fashion. So the government is in Supreme Court, and this is a pending matter. I better not comment in while the senior puny judge of the Supreme Court is.
Stay on. Nay, I not about that. I can probably give a last.
Stay orders as well. Yes. You are right. There are actually timelines. The law timeline where what should be the timeline for a partition proceeding brought before the revenue hierarchy or before the civil courts, but unfortunately the adherence to the timeline is a problem. We have laws. Every law has a timeline. Our financial laws have timeline, our revenue, our land laws have timeline, but unfortunately those timelines are not adhered to. So bringing in new timelines will not serve the purpose. Actually the courts are overburdened. This is that number issue, and they, even if they, when they try to curtail these problems by adhering to timelines, they unfortunately cannot. So provision of timelines in the law is not a problem. Implementation thereof is a problem.
Question of keeping integrity when we digitize the land records. So I think our process is fairly simple. Our mandate is simple. We have to digitize what we get. So if like the data that we get has some flaws, what we digitize is also flawed. But then we also make some kind of protocols to get that corrected, and this all happens under the Land Revenue Act. So how do we do it? uh, like there are two people who digitize on two different systems, and it ultimately converges on one system. So if there are like any typing mistakes, any clerical errors, they are cleared right at that stage. And then we have those mutation numbers. We enter those mutation numbers in a sequence. If there is any mutation number which is missing, so the system automatically gives us a summary. And then the third step that we take is we send this inconsistency report to the districts, and they correct it over there. It comes back, and then we migrate the data from our the servers where we're working to the production servers, and then we again send back this information in a printed form to the entire village for eyeballing inspection by the people. So if we get some reviews from there, we can correct that. If that is done, it's only then that we start providing services, digital services. Yes, we have issues, we do have issues, but then that is an ongoing process. And then the biggest challenge for me right now is to make sure the data that is available is correct. But like this question was once asked by honorable chief minister from me as well, like okay, Kram, so you have digitized the entire land records. uh, is there no more unauthorized change in the system now, the way Patwari used to do, like he used to override something? uh, and my answer was simple, like, madam, we do have unauthorized changes, but the good part about computers is it tells us who did that. So it's easy for us to track the people who did that. So it's something which scares most people from doing unauthorized changes.
Ali and Fauzia want to say anything?
In closing, I can say something. So, to this very complex matter of securing land rights, I have a very simple solution: improve the governance and institutions that are responsible for governance. Because I've noticed in my personal capacity also, when you have effective institutions, people comply. Whenever governance is right, the message goes loud and clear. In the securing land rights, cases come to us where the brothers, usually in inheritance cases, say, we will not give the inheritance rights to our sisters here, or some one sister and another brother also. And when they see that there is a there is an office or an institution which is probably going to or give those land rights per law, it in third hearing they change their stance, and then they say, no, we are not averse to giving the right, we're just trying to figure out how to do it, and then it ultimately settles. So no need to send it to formal ADR in that case also. The message goes loud and clear. And just finally, I agree with Ali Cheema here that information deficit is a big problem with access to rights, because recently my institution asked the Pakistan Telecom Authority to send messages to the general public about the availability of this forum. And SMS messages went to a large number of people, thanks to PTA and the telcos. And the registration of complaints in property rights shot up to about 20 times exponentially. So the norms were still there, everything, incompetence was there, malgovernance was there, but the number of complaints shot up. So maybe two areas to focus on.
All right, please join me in thanking our panel, and thank you to all of you for your engagement and questions.